So today I'm going to talk about Frippertronics. It's a technique that was popularised in the 70s by Robert Fripp, the guitarist from King Crimson, and Brian Eno, both of which need very little introduction. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of what Frippertronics is, and then how you can make your own Frippertronics setups using any DAW and stock plugins, and then using my Boss RC-600. The main reason that I'm doing this video on Frippertronics is that fairly recently I found out that my Boss RC-600 is capable of this technique. I had previously thought that it wasn't, but then I found someone demonstrating a way that you could use the Boss RC-600 looper to do Frippertronics style work. I quite enjoy using Frippertronics setups to build up music. It's quite a relaxing, quite a meditative process. And I think it's quite broad what you could do with it, depending on how you set up the delay and the other types of effects and the amount of feedback that you have. So first we'll have a look at exactly what Frippertronics is. So back in the day, early 70s, Brian Eno invites Robert Fripp to his studio to experiment and put out some music. So I've just taken delivery of 2 of these vintage tape decks. These are Revox A77s. I think they're A77s. There's lots of different models of the Revox ones that all look fairly similar. And this is quite a nice reel-to-reel recorder from the early 70s. I think from earlier, perhaps. And Fripp and Eno, they had these in the studio when they got together, and they were experimenting with them. Frippertronics is based on the use of 2 reel-to-reels like this, and using them together in order to create a long delay that then you can feed back into the system, and it allows you to play over your own playing. It's a type of overdubbing of your own work. So overdubbing your own playing with more of your playing. It's layering sound. Robert Fripp and Brian Eno weren't the first people to use a system like this. Terry Riley, the American minimalist, and the group of artists that he worked with about 10 years earlier in the early 60s, they were working with reel-to-reels. Terry Riley's system was called the Time Lag Accumulator. But the basic setup that Terry Riley had and Fripp and Eno had is the same. I think you can use most tape decks, but perhaps the reason why these Revox ones were used, I'm not really sure, is because they have multiple inputs. But you could probably do that with some kind of mixer anyway. So you can use pretty much any tape decks, I imagine. So that we can thread the tape through, we'll need to take these covers off here. And we can see all the tape heads now. These are very expensive now to buy. To buy a nice Revox tape deck like this would cost you a few £1000s, I think. I have no idea how expensive they were back in the day when they were bought new, but I expect they were probably still quite expensive then. So, in our Frippertronics system, we've got our tape. On the first deck, we've got this spool here that is running through this deck, and this deck is set to record. So we're recording as you would normally record on this deck. But instead of going to this second spool here, we're going along to another tape deck. And this tape deck is set to just play. So it's not recording at all, it's just playing. So your tape goes along, records the input, and then along to here where it plays back the input. And then the whole of your recording is stored on this second spool here. So it's like extending the tape deck into 2 tape decks. That distance there is the delay amount. So it records, moves along, plays. So you need your instrument. I've got my guitar here. There's my guitar. This is a classic guitar. This is a Gibson Les Paul. Les Paul was very involved in other techniques similar to this, which I might talk about in a bit. So Les Paul designed this guitar, Gibson made it, and Robert Fripp, one of his favourite guitars that he plays most of the time is a Gibson Les Paul. So Robert Fripp comes along, he's got his guitar, plugs it in, he records a note on there, that gets recorded here, it moves along, and then it plays on this second deck. So then we need another cable, and from the output of this deck, I'm not actually sure what the inputs and outputs actually are that you would use if you were setting up the Revox decks to do Frippertronics, because there are quite a lot of other inputs and outputs on the back. But for my demo, these ones on the front work just fine. So the output of this deck, you plug that into the other input on this deck. And then you can control the volume of this output. And then this goes back and is recorded for a second time on the tape 8 seconds later than where it was first recorded, at either the same or a slightly lower volume, which is your decay amount of delay. So you hit a note, it records it there, it moves along here, it plays it, which then records it here at a lower volume, moves along here, plays it, records it at a lower volume, moves along, records it. That's your delay loop going on. And then in the meantime, you can add in more lines. So you add in another note, and that plays on top, and that again goes down. So you get your 8-second loop constantly being re-recorded. And because it's being re-recorded, each time it's recorded, you get some tape effects added to the recording. So a bit more tape saturation and any wobbles, all the tape effect names, wow and flutter, and all of those things that recordings on tape have, they get slowly added in to each iteration of the sound. And obviously if you had this set at a level where the recording was the same volume that it was originally recorded, then the only difference between each version of the recording would be the cumulative added effects of re-recording it over and over on tape. So that is essentially Frippertronics there. Very simple system. And most of the time you see them set up like this. And obviously if you move the decks further apart, then your delay gets longer. So from where it records to where it plays, that's your delay length. And you can change that by moving the decks apart. But most people that I've seen, most setups seem to have them fairly close. So I'm presuming that that is about your delay length that's good enough for Frippertronics. One of the advantages that you get from a Frippertronics system is that whatever you're doing, whatever you're playing, is always being recorded and stored. So this tape in the end has a full record of the entire performance, so you get a full recording. If you use other tape loop systems where you're overdubbing tape, you need something else to record your performance as well. So there are various other techniques for recording, overdubbing sound, your own performance, but not so much in a live way. Les Paul, who designed this guitar, he is credited with coming up with the term sound on sound, which in terms of what he was doing, he was trying to create multi-track performances without having a multi-track recorder. So he would, at the time, he wasn't using tape. He was cutting a record, cutting a disc of a performance, a guitar, and then taking that recording and playing it, and then playing along or singing, putting another track and playing the disc and performing a second track and recording that on another disc, then taking that disc with 2 tracks on, performing another instrument, and then you get 3 tracks. And each time you do that and you go around, you record sound on top of the sound. The problem that you have with that is the degradation in the sound quality each time you do it. So you can't do it many times. And he kind of perfected that technique before multi-tracks. First using discs and then using tape later on. But that's not live really in the same way that Frippertronics is. The other technique that you can use is tape loops. If you just had one deck, you could have a loop of tape that went round. If you blank off the erase head in some way, then that tape loop that's going around one deck, you can keep playing on top of your previous performance on the tape loop. But again, you get the same problem as the sound on sound. It is sound on sound. So each time it records, it degrades the previous recording, but you have no control over that. So it just builds up layers. So it's not as controllable as Frippertronics, and you also don't get a full performance recorded out of it. With the Frippertronics, because you can change the level of the delay, you can fade it back out to nothing and then build it up again. There's a lot of scope for performance in it. So my first experience of these types of techniques, in fact, it was really a sound on sound technique, was using this Sharp tape deck. I had this when I was a kid. I had it from maybe the late 80s, maybe about 1990. And this is a brilliant tape deck. It's quite chunky and a good sound actually from these speakers. I thought it was at the time a good sound. But the amazing thing about this is a double tape cassette. A lot of double tape cassettes have got 2 cassettes next to each other. This one actually had 2 cassettes like that. So one behind the other one, inside there, 2 cassettes. So here's the top of it. So this is the Sharp WQT234 Catchy. And I own this for a number of years. And what's great about it is it's got these different modes. And you can see there, you probably can't see, this different tape mode button here allows you to either play the tapes, or it's got a dubbing mode on it. It allows you to have a mic input. So I used to put my guitar in there, and I actually had my first electric guitar was not actually a real Les Paul, Gibson Les Paul, but was a copy. So a cheap, wasn't very good. But that was it looked a bit like this. That was my first electric guitar, a Gibson Les Paul copy. So with this dubbing setting here, it allows you to play something on the first tape and put something into the mic input and record the 2 together onto the second tape. So effectively, this allowed me to do what Les Paul was doing with his lacquer discs. So I would record my guitar, a track, into there, and then I would take that tape, put it into the other slot, and then add another track, vocals or more guitar, and record along with the first recording onto that. And I would multi-track that lots of times. They're compact cassettes, but you still get that tape effect and degrading over time. And I had a lot of fun as a kid using this tape deck to do that kind of sound on sound stuff. It was good fun. So I've got some recordings still, but you're not going to hear them because they're bad. This is all I had. Because I had a record deck that went into the line in. I could put my guitar into the mic in there. 2 tape decks, little tiny equalizer, and FM radio. Brilliant. In the next part of the video, I'm going to look at recreating this system with some digital setups. I know that Robert Fripp used tape for many years, but later on did use digital systems as well. All you really need to recreate that in a digital setup is a long delay. And that's the main problem, is that most delays, either hardware delays or software delays or VSTs, they aren't very long. So there are hundreds of delays that have been made for a very long time, going right back, I don't know, to 1950s. You used to get the little tape delays, Roland Space Echoes, and before those you've got Watkins copycats, little tiny tape loops, delay pedals for guitars, but they're all quite short. I think you can put a longer loop in some of them, but I don't really know. And even in DAWs, a lot of VSTs, the delays aren't long enough. I think in Ableton, the longest delay is up to 5 seconds. You could at a push probably do this with 5 seconds, but it's not as much fun. I think a bit longer than 5 seconds is good. So I've got a technique where you can chain delays together. As long as you've got a full dry wet pot on your delay, you can chain VSTs together to make longer delays. So I'm going to demonstrate that technique. The El Capistan Strymon tape delay pedal does a lot of delay effects, but has one mode on it that does up to 20 seconds of delay. So I think it's very popular to do Frippertronics with the El Capistan because it has the tape effects built in, and other Strymon pedals as well. I think the Timeline is quite popular as a guitar pedal to do Frippertronics work. But most of the pedals, guitar pedals, that have a long enough delay are quite expensive still. So I don't own any at the moment. And then finally, the other way that you can do it is with looper pedals. And some looper pedals are quite reasonably priced. A lot of the looper pedals have a feedback amount so that the loop does fade, and that's what you obviously need to do Frippertronics. But the Boss RC-600, even though some of the other Boss pedals do have that ability to fade the loop over time, doesn't have that ability. But recently I found a technique, there's a YouTube video on it, on how to set up the RC-600 to do Frippertronics. So I'm going to run through that as well. So in this first technique, I'm going to demonstrate how to do Frippertronics using any DAW with delay plugins. So I'm using Ableton Live, and the standard delay plugin that comes in it. So I've got a simple setup. I've got my Yamaha Pacifica guitar here, and that is running into volume pedal. And then from the volume pedal, it's going into my Boss RC-600 looper. The only reason that I'm using the looper, I'm not doing any looping on it. I'm just using it for some effects to shape the tone of the guitar. Bit of distortion, nice overdriven preamp, and a little bit of a phaser on it. And then I'm using it as an audio interface to go from the USB on the looper straight into Ableton Live. So it's a very simple setup. This is the guitar sound. Just fairly basic. Nice bit of overdrive on it. And then on the master channel, I can turn on a nice bit of reverb. So here's a bit of Valhalla Supermassive. Makes anything beautiful and ethereal. So that's our basic sound to work with. For Frippertronics, you need a long delay. The standard delay in Ableton, here it is, the delay plugin, is up to 5 seconds. So I've got one here, and if at the moment it's on 100% dry, so nothing's going through the delay. If I set it to 5 seconds, maximum delay, and then I turn the dry wet to 50%, you get a 5-second delay. So And that's got no feedback on it, so it just has a single 5-second delay. So with Frippertronics, you want some feedback so that it slowly decays. So we'll go for 50%. So we've now got a 5-second delay that is slowly fading away, decaying away. So that is the basic setup you need for Frippertronics. But 5 seconds is not really that long. I mean, if you put the feedback up a little bit, you can kind of do some Frippertronics. So you get the idea. You can do like a 5-second Frippertronics just with a basic delay, 5-second delay. It's not really long enough. So how do we get a longer delay that can feed back and decay nicely? So first off, you can't just chain delays and then have the feedback work. So I could put another delay after this 5-second one, and I could get a 10-second delay. There'd be no way of having the slow decay for 10 seconds. It would always, if you turn the feedback up on an individual delay plugin, be 5 seconds. So you've got to not use the feedback knob in the delay plugin itself and find a way to do that. So if we turn off this delay now here on the channel coming in, and instead we'll build a send and return loop that we can use to chain delays on. So in Ableton, they're called return tracks. So I've got one here and I've set it up so that I've got 2 delays. If you group those 2 delays, so select them both, and then you group them by pressing Command G, then you will get an audio effects rack. So it groups them together, and that then gives you, under this little icon here, little tiny top icon, this knob icon, you click on that and you'll get some macro knobs that you can then assign to things within the rack. So I like to do this in Ableton in that there are 2 delays and I can assign them both. Here, if you right click on there, then map that to the first macro, and then if you right click on this one, map it also to the first macro. Then the delay time from 0 to 5 seconds on both of the delays is mapped to the first macro. So that means when I move this, both of the delays go up and down, and I'm effectively going between 0 and 10 seconds. And you have to remember that the value on there, 5, is half of the actual delay that you're getting. So at the moment, we've got 2 delays, one after the other, and both of them are set to full wet. So you play a note on the guitar, and that's just a dry note, now with no delay on it at all, and it's not going to the effects channel at all. So if I then move this send here, this will send the guitar signal into the return track, the 2 delays. If I just set that to go to the master track, then we'll just get up to a 10-second delay. So if I send the full amount, the full volume of the track to the return track, we'll see what we get now. So it's set to 2 5s, full wet, and the dry signal is coming from the main channel. So we should get a 10-second delay. So there's our 10-second delay, and there's just one 10-second delay. So we want that to have some kind of feedback setting on it. So how do we do that? So instead of sending this output of this double delay to the master channel, you send it to a track. So I've called this track here delay return. That allows you to send the output of the delay back into itself with the send. So if I turn this right up, then we've got a note played on the guitar that gets sent to the double tape delay, a 10-second delay, that gets played on the delay return, which then gets sent back to the tape delay. So there should be an endless 10-second delay. So let's see what we've got here. So we've now got our endless 10-second delay, and that's what you need for Frippertronics. So we've got everything we need. So if I reduce this send level a little tiny bit, then the delay will start to fade out. So that's it, we've got everything we need. Just by you control your feedback amount, your decay amount is controlled by this send which goes back into the effects. And your initial level of your decay is controlled by the send into the decay. And then you can add little bits and pieces in on top of that. I have here a saturator because I'm trying to slowly change the sound as it repeats the delay. And you can obviously, you can put whatever you want in there. You can create whatever tape effects you want, and you can get quite creative with it so that each time it goes round, it might add a little bit of wobble, or it might add a little bit of chorus. I've just got a saturator on here that's going to add a little tiny bit of saturation each time. And then I've got just a volume to try and balance that gain so that it doesn't get out of hand. And then I have a second volume here, which drops the volume. So if I want it to fade out quite quickly, I can just turn that on and the fade will become quicker. So that's how I have it set up. And that's it. That's Frippertronics on Ableton. 2 delays in a return track, feeding back on itself, allows you to create beautiful soundscapes. And obviously you don't have to stick to 10 seconds. You can chain as many delays in this way as you want. You could have really long delays if you wanted. And it's actually a very simple and easy to use method. I imagine you could do it with pretty much any DAW. I'm just going to show how to set up the RC-600 to do Frippertronics on its own. I didn't realise that it was possible to do this. A lot of loopers and some of the older Boss loopers do actually have a delay feedback setting so that the loop will fade over time. But the RC-600 doesn't have that. But there is a way, a hack that you can use to do it. I found this demonstrated on YouTube, so I'll put a link to the original video that I found down in the description. Same as the last version, I've just got my guitar, Yamaha Pacifica, going through my volume pedal into the RC-600 and then running through some of the input effects, a preamp and a little bit of a phaser, and then it's just going straight into Ableton where I'm recording it. So track 1 set up here, if I hit record, it's now waiting for an input from the guitar, and if I hit a note, it'll start recording. When I hit this button again, it'll start playing. So we've got a loop now. Effectively, that's like an endless delay. And then if we hit this again, we can overdub on the top of it. So we're overdubbing on the top, and we've almost got Frippertronics. But it's more like a tape loop in that nothing's ever decaying, and it's just building up layers on top of itself. So it'll never fade out. Eventually there'll be too much sound. So let's stop that. So we've cleared that track now. So track 1 is currently set to a normal overdub where it layers on top. If we press the loop button, then we go into track 1. You can see that on this second page, overdub is set to overdub. If we change that to be replace 1, then that will mean that instead of overdubbing over the top, it will actually replace the recording with what we're playing. But then we would lose the original recording. So if we move along 2 more screens, then there's this bounce setting, and if we turn that to on, like that, and then go back out to the loop 1 menu and into the record menu, then here there is the bounce setting for record. So we've got bounce on, and then we bounce the track that we're recording back to itself. So now we have track 1. Anything that is played new is replacing what's already there, but it's also bouncing the output of 1 down to 1 all the time in overdub mode. So that will mean that it will sound exactly the same at the moment as we had before, even though it's a different method. So we'll hit record, play a note, so this note is now just playing in a loop. But now when we hit overdub, it will start to record over the top of this, but including the output. So it's bouncing itself down in overdub mode. And so now I can layer in things on the top, just the same as we did before. So it's the same as it was before, but it's doing it with a different method. And then the last key part is that because the output of this track can be run through the effects before it is then captured onto the bounce, you can use a track effect to lower the volume each time. So it records onto the loop, and then each time it plays off the loop, it will go lower in volume. So let's try that. So if we then go to track effects, you can set up any effect here that allows you to just have the dry level going through the effect and then drop the level of the dry level so that you effectively get a drop in volume each time it's playing. So I've just got a delay here set to 1 millisecond, very short delay, no feedback, and then the effect level itself is set to nothing. But the dry level is set to 60%, so it will slowly reduce in volume when I turn this on. And we should now get that decaying loop, and then we can play over the top of that. So there we go, it's going down in volume. And so there you have it, Frippertronics on the Boss RC-600. Set the track to overdub replace one, put bounce on, and then bounce the track to itself. Then use any effect that has a dry level in it, turn the effect right down, and then use the dry level setting to create the feedback back into the loop. And that's how you do it. So I hope that's been of use. I enjoy using these setups to make music. I think there's an awful lot you can do with them, depending on how long you have the delays going, and then the type of effects you can add into the delays. You can do, you know, all sorts of delay, feedback type of effects. So it's a lot of fun to work in this way, whether you own some nice Revox tape decks or not. There's always a way to work in these ways. You can, as always, find all of my music, my field recordings on Bandcamp, and also my artist pivot cards. They're on Bandcamp as well. And you can go and sign up to my newsletter on Substack, and you'll find out everything that I'm doing. If you've got any experience of using tape decks for Frippertronics or any other techniques you found for doing similar things, let us know your own experience in the comments. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.